Which of these images do you think you can see that I was depressed in, that I was struggling with my mental health, that my suicidal ideation was at its peak? The answer is all of them, to greater or lesser degrees. The reason I show these photographs is not to highlight myself, but to show, as we have seen before with celebrity photographs or photographs of people who have taken their own lives in the media, it's so hard to tell or know what's going on in someone's mind just from a photograph, because for all intents purposes, it might look like that person is having the time of their life, to use a cliche, or be in wonderful spirits, or really, really enjoying themselves, or really look like they're just happy. And it's interesting, as not only a man, but a man growing up in the northeast of England, where I do. I use the northeast of England as a touchstone because I have no other frame of reference apart from when I was a lot younger, living in the south. I've lived here since I was 10 years old, so this is pretty much all I've known. And it is a very machismo, testosterone-fueled part of England to live in my experience. Again, it's the only one I have, where being a man is identified as being associated with certain things. And it's interesting, there's a phrase that many of us have probably heard at some point in our lives from a parent, a teacher, a coach, a friend. Perhaps we've even said it to ourselves, and it is something quite common in the Northeast. Man up. And it rarely arrives with cruelty, and often it arrives with love and well-meaning. It's not said as a slur against your manliness. It could be a father trying to prepare his son for, what he believes he will experience in the world. And those of us that have boys and girls as kids will go through these various experiences of how best to prepare them for what we feel might lie ahead for them. Obviously, the world is always changing. It's hard to tell, but we do the best we can. So it could be a father trying to prepare his son for the difficulties of the world. It could be a parent trying to teach resilience, a generation passing on what they believe helped them to survive. But I was wondering lately about whether some of the lessons we inherited came with costs we never fully understood. Because today we're talking about men's mental health, not as a political issue, not as a competition, not as an argument, just as a human conversation. And perhaps the best place to start is with a confession. Now, for the longest time, I thought I understood depression. I worked in healthcare. I'd cared for people experiencing mental illness. I'd cared for family members experiencing mental illness. I'd seen people in crisis. And if I'm totally honest, I carried around a picture in my head of what I thought depression looked like. It looked like sadness, of course. It looked like hopelessness. It looked like someone in uncontrollable tears sat in a corner of their room, unable to function, someone unable to get out of bed, people visibly struggling, people who looked ill. And because that was the picture I carried, I missed something absolutely important. That depression doesn't always look like depression. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like somebody's throwing themselves into work every waking hour of the day. Sometimes it looks like someone withdrawing from the people that they love the most in the world. Sometimes it looks like irritability, or drinking, or taking drugs, or taking risks, or simply losing interest in the things that once brought you the most joy and happiness. And the difficult thing is that many men don't recognize these things as signs of poor mental health. They might think it's stress, they might think it's tiredness, they might think it's part of getting older, they might think it's a hormonal thing to do with low testosterone, or they think that everyone feels like this. And perhaps that's one of the reasons that these conversations matter, because many men aren't sitting at home thinking, oh my God, I'm depressed. They might be sitting at home thinking, I just need to get on with it. And that belief didn't come from nowhere. That was my belief. Most of us learnt it. I learnt it. My dad was a misogynistic, drunken asshole, but I learned it from him. We don't learn it through lectures necessarily. We don't learn it through instruction manuals. We learn it through observation, by repetition in our mind, through the culture that we grow up in, through the people around us. And I think about my dad's generation and my dad's generation, my granddad's generation, men who lived through the war. My parents were children during the Second World War. My mum remembered being in a bomb shelter when she was a little girl and things. So they were children at the tail end of the war. And it makes me think about how different the world was then and the things that people had to cope with that are radically different to the things my generation has to cope with. And I think about the men who came home from that war and then just went straight back to work. Men who experienced things they rarely discussed. And again, my dad's generation, despite the fact he was a horrible individual, he was a hardworking man. And from a work perspective, he was a reliable man. Not as a family man, but as a work perspective. He was a man that got up every morning and just needed what to be done. They never spoke about anxiety or depression or being sad or being lonely. Not necessarily because they didn't feel those things, but talking about them wasn't what men did. My dad drank heavily. That might have been his way of coping. I don't know. But strength meant endurance for him to teach me. Responsibility meant carrying burdens, and vulnerability was just weakness. I don't know how many times I would be sad or emotional, and my dad would tell me that I was gay. That was his response. Not gay as in, using it lightheartedly. Immediately, he assumed if I had these feelings, I must be homosexual. Now, would that have mattered? Well, actually, my dad was a massive homophobe, so it would have mattered a great deal. However, that was the kind of reductive attitude that my dad had. He didn't know he wasn't around very much. When he was around, he drank, he was violent, he was aggressive, he was abusive, and wrapped up in all of that were those types of attitudes. Just get on with it. Don't be sad. You're not a man. What are you crying for? You should just go start fights all the time and get into fights. And what you're doing if you're trying to negotiate with someone, you just punch your way out of things. That was his way of looking at the world, right or wrongly, as he had experienced it himself. And looking back at, well, not so much my dad maybe, but when you consider my dad, and maybe men of that generation, I don't think they were emotionally incapable as such. I think maybe they were emotionally isolated, because there's a difference. Because emotional isolation isn't the absence of feeling. I often used to say that choosing not to care is very different from not caring at all. It's feeling everything and believing you're supposed to carry it all alone by yourself. And perhaps that's the silence we've inherited, not intentional silence and certainly not malicious silence, just the silence passed from one generation to the next, certainly from a male perspective. And it's a silence built on expectations, many of which were created for understandable reasons. The world could be hard, can be hard. Life could and can be unforgiving. Families depended on men providing stability. That's not quite the same anymore. But the unintended consequence of that was many boys learned something else. We learned to be accepting that some emotions were acceptable and many weren't. Determination, that was good. Anger, that was understandable. Confidence, that was encouraged to the point of arrogance and feeling superior. Fear, no, that was less welcome. That wasn't a good one. Sadness, absolutely not. I was not allowed to be sad at all. So you kept it hidden. Vulnerability, absolutely not. I would get the shit kicked out of me if I looked like I was pretending to be vulnerable or even acting vulnerable. So you have to be careful with that one. And over time, these lessons become habits, and habits become identity. And eventually a man can reach a point where he genuinely doesn't know how to explain what he's feeling. Not because he's hiding it, because he's spent decades translating emotional pain into something else. Work, humor, silence, distraction, busyness. And that matters because when we're looking at the statistics surrounding men's mental health, they are quite sobering. Men account for around 3/4 of suicides in the UK. Men are less likely to access psychological therapies. Men often present later when they do seek help. But statistics and figures only tell us what's happening. They don't necessarily tell us why. And I suspect part of that answer lies in how men understand themselves, or perhaps misunderstand themselves, to put it another way. I've lost count of the number of conversations I've heard where someone says, I'm fine. I've used that one, only to discover later that they weren't fine. Not because they were lying to us, because they genuinely believed they were coping. They were functioning. They were working. They were providing for their family. They were paying the bills. They were looking after everyone else. And from the outside, life appeared normal. But inside them, something was slowly unraveling. And this is where I think we've sometimes got things wrong as a society, in my opinion. We will often ask, why don't men talk? Why don't men share their feelings? We don't want men to share their feelings because that's not what men are supposed to do. But perhaps a better question is, what happened that taught them it's safer not to do those things? Because very few boys are born believing their feelings don't matter. It's something that's learnt somewhere along the way. Now, the good news is that things are changing slowly, imperfectly, imperfectly. I can't say that word. But undeniably, today's younger generation seems more emotionally literate than the ones that came before. And men's mental health is discussed more openly. I discuss it more openly now that I have a better understanding of it personally. Schools talk about well-being, employers talk about mental health and offer mental well-being support. Athletes speak openly about their struggles. Public figures discuss anxiety and depression. Conversations that once happened in whispers are now happening in the public forum. And that is progress. That's real progress. But understanding it takes time. As with all things, changing culture takes time. And perhaps the first step isn't telling men to talk, and certainly not telling them not to talk. Perhaps it's helping them understand what they're feeling is worth talking about in the first place. Because maybe the problem was never that men were weak. Maybe it was that too many strong men spent their lives carrying things they should never have had to carry alone, because that's how they were told they should function. And maybe finally, we're beginning to realize that strength and vulnerability were never opposites to begin with. Now, it is important to end this episode with, if you are struggling with your mental health, please try and speak to someone you trust. Your GP is an option, or there are support organisations such as ANDYSMANCLUB, Calm, and of course the Samaritans, which can be contacted on 116123 in the UK and the Republic of Ireland. Just know that you're not alone.